Welcome to this week's episode of Zero to a Million, brought to you by Unstack. I'm your host, Zach Rigo. Today I'm joined by David Roger, co-founder and CEO of Felix Gray, the original best-in-class blue light eyewear company. David, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Zach.
Yeah, excited to dig into this. I told you I've been a fan of the brand and aware of the brand for a long time. Seems to me like an overnight success, but I know that is not always the case. So I'm excited to learn a little bit about your background to start, and then we'll jump into building this brand to what it is today.
Cool. Awesome. So
take us through, the genesis for the idea, but really your career leading up to jumping into this business.
So pretty early on in my career, to be honest, but I graduated school in 2013 and went to work for the former CEO of Zappos, Tony Hsieh, who unfortunately passed away last year. But I worked on his project called Downtown Project, which he had put in $350 million of his own money into revitalizing downtown Las Vegas, which is where Zappos is based. And I got there, and basically we were buying all these kind of falling apart, decrepit like buildings, and it was a little bit of a seedy area. And the idea was, how do we turn these into really amazing places to visit, whether it's a bar or a restaurant, really get people to come to the downtown area. And eventually, by driving the demand to go there, you then start to drive the demand to live there. And that's been really successful as a project. I got there, and we basically had these projects ranging from $1 million to $25 million plus in costs. We had no idea if these things were going to make money or they're going to lose money, and they basically tasked me with figuring that out, which really cool to do right out of school, but it meant that I was namely in Excel for 12 hours a day, and my eyes just started to absolutely kill me. And I'm looking around, I'm like, why are my eyes killing me? Why are my eyes tired at the end of the day? Why do sometimes I get this nagging headache? And how come half the people I know are complaining about the same thing, whether it's coworkers, whether it's friends that have started their own jobs? And so I started talking to optometrists and ophthalmologists and learned a lot of this has to do with what screens produce, namely blue light, which is high energy light that comes off of any screen today, and glare. And if you can filter blue light, you can eliminate glare, you create this more comfortable experience. It's like, okay, great. I'm going to go buy some. The fact is that at the time they were like, look, there's either these clear lenses that don't really work very well. That's still true today. They're only filtering a very little percent of blue light where screens actually produce blue light. They're only filtering like 2 to 3%. Or there are these yellow and orange lenses in these kind of like hunting goggly frames that will make you look like one of the X-Men. They will work, but you will look like one of the X-Men. And my thought was like, well, I don't want to look like an X-Men, and I don't want to buy the thing that doesn't actually work, that looks normal. And so started on the side working and really just networking to like understand the eyewear industry better, and ended up developing a better way of filtering blue light in a clear lens. So we filter 30% of blue light where screens produce it at 455 nanometers, as opposed to like that 2 to 3%. And then we package everything in like really beautiful frame designs as well, right? So German metals and Italian acetates, and then timeless designs where you always feel good wearing your pair of glasses. And that's how Felix Gray started. It was just truly out of need. And my co-founder, Chris, came from banking and hedge funds, and same thing with him, right? It was just truly out of a need. And we kind of looked and said, so many people are complaining about this. If we can call out the problem by name and provide a solution that works and makes people, not only their eyes feel good, makes them feel good because they're wearing something that looks great, like we can have a real business here. And that's how we started, and we started to grow from there.
What year was that?
So we launched in May of 2016.
Okay. So we are a little over 5 years. It's awesome.
We're 5 years in, yeah.
That's great. And product development, I imagine, is somewhat challenging. You mentioned there's an eyewear industry. It's massive. There are sunglasses, there are prescription, and everything in between, hunting glasses that are yellow. You had to somehow, come up with a lens that worked, one, because you're trying to solve a problem. Two, find a partner that's creating somewhat fashionable designs, or start creating them yourselves. What was that process like, and where did you really start to say, okay, we can actually do this? Because product development's got to be tough when you're entering or creating a somewhat new market.
Yeah, a lot of it was sampling different lenses at first, then iterating on the processes, early on, we found, our lens partner who's been awesome in helping us with the R&D behind the products, making sure that what we're creating is really going to be like, again, clear but highly effective. And then on the frame designs, it's actually the early days, like me designing the frames and working with our frame manufacturers to understand different angles and different ways that you're going to see success and what works in the US market. And, what are the classic shapes that people are looking for. And so really at the end of the day, it's just hard work and being really resourceful and having amazing people that help you along that journey early on when you are really not knowledgeable. And I think that just means that sounds like getting lucky, and it is, but I think that hard work puts you in the position to get lucky. And being a good person and being good natured and being a good partner puts you in a position to get lucky. And that's how it, started from a product development standpoint.
First order, one design. Did you have multiple? I'm not, ballsy to go multiple.
We started with three. We started with three designs. So really two like a classic square, which is our Nash, which is still our bestseller. More rectangular, which is the Faraday, which also does very well. And actually a smaller, rounder frame called Turing, which is way less popular, doesn't fit as many heads. And that's a good lesson because that actually fit my small head. Doesn't fit most people's heads. And so it's like, don't just build the product development based off yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate that because the small frames do not work on my big melon. So that's a great lesson to learn. So you get the product, it's landed, you've developed it, you're feeling great about it. There's an education piece, right? There's a legitimacy piece where I think everyone's going to look at these and go, they look good. I'm willing to take a chance, but is this going to work? How do you legitimize and educate a market that, hey, there is actual symptoms that we're relieving with these glasses, and here's how we do it and how much, it's helping?
So one of the core tenets for us is being everything we're going to do is going to be thoughtfully designed and research backed, right? So there's a ton of research that's going into the problems, into the science behind why these problems are happening. Whether that's like definitive or like very educated hypotheses from different doctors, and then what makes this product special. And so putting that on our site, in our marketing, in the conversations we have with customers through like our CX team, all really, really important. Everyone knows, like you go to Felix Gray, like there's just a lot of really good content. The trick is then also how do you turn that into ways to be digestible? And one of the other core philosophies we have is like educational but not boring. And this idea is like we will go down the rabbit hole as far as you want. Like we're there to walk you through everything. Some people want high level, some people want to go a little bit deeper, and some people want to go 16 layers deep. We're happy to be on that journey with you, whatever you need from an education standpoint. When we first launched though, like no one knew what blue light was. A lot of people were like, this isn't really gonna, like, is this really real? Like, does this really help? There's definitely a snake oil aspect, which we still fight today because, again, there are products out there that are largely placebo. And so for us, it was really a great product sells itself eventually, right? So we leveraged our like free 30-day trial period, right? You can returns exchange within 30 days, no questions asked whatsoever. So it's not going to harm you to try. And what we have seen is that we collect our data ourselves. We ask people 90 days in if they experience symptoms of digital eye strain beforehand, right? So again, that's the eye strain, the dry eyes, the blurry vision, things along that front, the headaches. And then we ask people, people that said they did experience those things, which about 9 out of 10 people are buying for a reason around that, right? Then we ask them, well, did they experience significant improvement by wearing Felix Gray? 9 of 10 of whom say yes. So you basically get this product that like actually works. And then as like the problem is big enough, and if you've heard that it works and like you get people, whether they're friends and family, whether it's just reviews online, whether it's a YouTube review or just like a write-up, whatever it might be, you're like, like there's enough credibility here and it doesn't hurt for me to try it. And then you buy it and it works for you too. That only like increases that flywheel. That's just going to help with that acquisition growth, right? Like more and more people know about the product. More and more people have tried it and see it works. More and more people are telling other people about it, writing reviews about it, things like that. And that really like we've been able to grow because we've created such a good product first and foremost.
Right. No, makes sense. And I think this is something that I believe in, mostly because other people in my office bought them, wore them. Most of them suffered from migraines. I actually, one person specifically reported to me had migraines here and there, bought them and saw like legitimate impact on, having fewer migraines, which is crazy. And that to me makes me feel like, okay, these work. That's better than an online review. That's better than, content. Now, I feel like I've known y'all for longer than 2016. Obviously not possible. I came across you through Barstool Sports Content. You all did partnerships with them. It feels like long ago. I'd love to know when you started to enter, content collaborations and sponsorships, because I feel like that made me think y'all were maybe way bigger than you are or were at the time. Which I think is a benefit as well in legitimizing the product and the business. So I'd be interested to hear about your strategy there.
Yeah, so we started, when we first started, we were really acquiring customers through it's early, you're talking about mid 2016, early 2017, Facebook customer acquisition costs were ridiculously cheap. That's not true today.
Yep.
But we also recognized that early on that we wanted to diversify outside of just being dependent on a Facebook platform. And for us, it was really important. We thought that podcast was a really interesting way to grow. That was also, I think as a marketer, you have to understand there's, especially early on as you have to understand arbitrage opportunities, and you have to understand when there's not the right kind of supply demand curve in a market because it's too new. And that was true of Facebook. That was also true of podcasts in 2017 when we started with podcasts. And our agency at the time was like, look, we're seeing really good success with Barstool. They're really sticky. Obviously, Chris and I, we followed Barstool too. We knew them well. And we started to build our relationship with Barstool through podcasts at first. And you could see that audience really listened to people like Big Cat, people like Dave Portnoy. And what we found is that then those guys start to really like the product themselves. And a key takeaway is when you're working with anyone, whether it's a podcaster, an influencer, whoever it might be, they have to understand the product that they have. They have to actually like it. They have to see the need. They have to see the benefit from this specific product, because it makes the read so much more genuine, right? Unless you're doing things on purely a CPM arbitrage type basis where you're I can afford this CPM and I'm just going to get the word out. And that can happen. You'll see the State Farms of the world, they'll do that, right? But for a product company, if you're going from 0 to 1 million, you need to have those impact dollars be really, really significant. And so having someone that takes what's supposed to be a 30-second ad read and turns it into a 2.5-minute ad read because they talk about their own story and they're joking about it, that becomes really big. I actually remember one time Dave Portnoy was I don't know if these are working, but I am wearing them. My eyes do hurt less. And Big Cat's giving him crap for being I think your eyes just hurt because you're gambling, because these things definitely work. They help me. You're just your eyes are just stressed from you losing money. Yeah. So those are ad reads that you're never going to get if people don't really buy into a product, don't really believe it. And because those guys have been so good at what they do, we've just been able to go further and further down that integrated marketing campaign with them. Yeah.
I think what's even interesting about that, and you mentioned their ad reads in some cases aren't always even ad reads, it's just conversation and the product gets intertwined, which I think is an amazing experience for the consumer. I think the advertiser, right? Your marketing team didn't write up that ad read and it didn't feel like they were being held at gunpoint to read it. They just were shooting the shit like they always do. And it came up organically. I think the other thing you start to see is they're wearing them all the time. They're not wearing them just when you're, putting up ad dollars. They're wearing them on live feeds that have nothing to do with your sponsorship, which is incredible. And whether the consumer recognizes that or not, I think over time you do. But to me, that's something that sticks with me as a consumer of okay, they're just wearing them to wear them. They're just, drinking it to drink it. They're not doing it because they're being paid to do so, whatever the product may be. So I think that's super interesting. You mentioned CPMs and arbitrage. It's got to feel like a pretty big leap to say this podcast has X number of downloads, we're going to spend X number of dollars on it, and we're just going to hope that the rest of the funnel pans out. Because I'm sure while it was less than it is today 4 or 5 years ago, it still probably wasn't super cheap because some of their podcasts were quite large at that point. How did y'all swallow that pill to say, you know what, let's just do it and hope it pans out?
And you have to take some risks in order to grow. If you're just going to stay stagnant, you'll hit a plateau. You'll get to one level, and then you're not going to be able to grow beyond that. So it's just taking the right educated risks. It's understanding your finances to understand the appetite that you can have. It's making sure you actually have like some math behind the models to say, okay, well, if this is a $500 cost per acquisition, what does that do to my month? What does that do to my cash flows?
Yeah.
And then it's just taking the risks that you can handle, right? But you have to take some risks. Like you have to have a test budget every month to be able to find whether it's new things within that channel, right? Like we test different podcasts within a channel, that we know the channel of podcast works. It's also testing a completely new channel to begin with, like let's say direct mail or radio or something like that. So it really is just about calculated risks, which I think is true of any business.
Totally. One thing I think people will be fearful of, right, is it feels, a Facebook ad, for example, feels very direct response. Like I put an ad up for a product, they click it, they go to the page, they buy it. Whereas a podcast ad or a sponsorship for some piece of content is great and you can get a large impression share, but it's not, something that I'm necessarily just going to like grab my computer or phone, type in the URL and buy. It's a brand recognition and awareness piece. How do you start to forecast and float like, hey, there's going to be a long tail here. Like we might get a little pop, but really the revenue starts to come in from this 3-6 months later as the brand awareness gets bigger with them. Like how do you swallow that pill? And at what point did you feel stable enough to do that?
So I'd say, especially back in the day, podcast was more direct response.
Okay.
So I think that has changed as podcasting has just matured as an industry. There's ability to skip through ads more easily. That's why like having amazing ad reads where there's been a couple times where I've actually gone back to listen to an ad because I'm like skipping through it. And I'm like, wait, that was what I just caught for like that 1 second was funny. Like, wait, what? Go back. Yeah. That obviously is helpful. I think that you really have to look at it. You have to set things up that's really setting up your attribution and the way you're collecting data properly. So you should always have a how did you hear about a survey tool on your confirmation page, right? So you should know what channel they came from, and then a level deeper, what specific show they heard you from, right? So like, if you check out Fix Gray, you'll see like Facebook, Instagram, Google, word of mouth, podcast, influencer, whatever it is. And then if you click podcast, say, well, which podcast? Right. And then you have to clean that data. We send people to a direct URL. So we send them to a special vanity URL. So it's, felixgrayglasses.com/Dave if it's Dave Portnoy. We work with Mind Pump, /Mind Pump. And so then we can actually track the sessions and we can track the conversions there and we can match that up to the how did you hear about us stuff. So you're actually like looking at those relationships to say, okay, like what is the impact that I'm seeing? Because I will say that like, especially if you're early, you can't just have brand awareness campaigns. Like you need to pay for performance. You don't have the cash flows to say, hey, in 6 months I'll get the customer unless like your LTVs or margins or your AOVs or something is insane. So really like, you do need to look at performance, but it's really about setting up kind of those vanity URL metrics, and it's about setting up, the how did you hear about us stuff so you can really understand what's working and what's not working. And what's working, you lean into, and what's not working, you lean out of.
Yeah, and you mentioned hearing an ad read and going back and listen to it. You also mentioned an agency earlier, kind of bringing Barstool to the table early. How are you sourcing these content partnerships today? And are you still really heavily involved in like, hey, this is an interesting ad read, like we should reach out to this podcast, or is that something that you've had fully outsourced for a while?
So we work with an agency. I think it's really helpful to there's a lot of different networks out there on the podcast side. So like having one group being able to manage, also them just knowing what's been working in market is really helpful. But, we then have, one of the people on our growth team is like working directly with them because we want to also be providing our analysis. We have a conversational marketer specifically oriented around making sure that the onboarding and the ad reads are going to be good, right? So like she's actually meeting with new hosts and explaining to them the story about Felix Gray, the product about Felix Gray, like so that they're getting their glasses so they can try them on themselves. That way you get people onboarded that actually get the product, so the read becomes far better and it's going to have more impact. So it's not just like a big mistake would be like never give anything to an agency and just expect it to work. Like you need to make sure that you have internal resources applying to manage that agency. And just the best agencies, that relationship will get really strong and they'll feel like part of the team.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. I think you brought up an interesting point there too of the agency. When the agency is bringing you an idea, they're bringing some hopefully data from another client or someone that's tested it. You could start to use that to build your model. And then the feedback loop is key of, hey, here's what the output was after looking at, every single checkout that came through the page. I think that is really interesting and certainly something that falls off even when you're using an agency. I talked to a lot of agencies over the course of my career that are still searching for a good reporting tool, and that's never a good sign because you need something that is being reported on pretty tightly, especially when you're early on, because to your point, any investment needs to provide some return or else you're going to lose any bandwidth to scale.
Yeah, and when you're early, though, your brand awareness is so small that you should see that performance be better, right? Like when no one knew about Felix Gray and they hear about Felix Gray, there's going to be more performative nature than now where we have hundreds of thousands of customers. Like, awareness is pretty decent. Now you're really like, that's when you then have to even rely on, the how to hear about us stuff and, the vanity URLs and things like that even more so, because when you're first and you're early, then you're going to see that blip right away. You'll just see like the revenue because like no one knows about you. So it's really easy to acquire that first 1,000 customers, a little harder to acquire that next 1,000 customers, right? As you get bigger and bigger and bigger, you just have to make sure your attribution, your data is in a better and better place that even if you don't see the pop right away, you will see that long term and you have other things in the model that allow you to not see that same level of pop, but still create, profitable revenue.
Right. Love it. What are you most excited about? What are y'all working on next that's going to help continue the scale of Felix Gray? Because you've hit a new benchmark, right? You don't want that plateau. You want to continue to go. Take me through the next 12 months for Felix Gray, what you're most excited about.
Yeah, so a couple things. We're really starting to grow into other distribution channels beyond online. So we've basically been all direct to consumer. And now we're kicking off really key partnerships with some pretty awesome companies. A couple that I can mention right now are GameStop and Best Buy. And a couple others are some other big box that I can't, but they'll be coming in 2022. That's just really cool to be able to potentially you're using them to find new customers. They're using you to have this new brand that people are really excited about. And it's a really nice symbiotic relationship. And we're working with, retailers that really make sense, like a Best Buy, like a GameStop. Another thing that's really important is in 2020, we started looking long and hard and saying, okay, yes, we've created like the best in class blue light eyewear. The product that we have is amazing. I still read every review and my favorite part of my day is just reading a review of someone saying something like, I no longer get migraines. Like that's just always awesome. But we started thinking, okay, well, why do we start the company and really what is the bigger picture here? And for us, it's always been centered around this idea of improving the relationship between people and technology, right? So we didn't start an eyewear company to create a cheaper pair of glasses. We didn't start an eyewear company to like have the best design. Like obviously those are important to us, but we started because our eyes were killing us, right? We weren't evolved to be in front of screens all day, every day. Our eyes were bothering us. How do you help address that? And so our thought is, there's a variety of different aspects of our relationship with technology that we can improve, right? There's obviously the level of like both short-term eye comfort and potential long-term eye health, right? Which we work on. There's sleep and how blue light suppresses melatonin secretion. There is the ergonomics in terms of, hey, your back, your neck, your wrist may be hurting. There is the desire to feel more energetic, more productive because a lot of people are using this as a workplace productivity tool. And so we're identifying those aspects and saying, okay, well, what other products can we build into those areas? And then how do we own the larger conversation around this idea of, again, improving the relationship between you and your technology. What we call digital wellness, right? So if people care about the food they put into their bodies, the type of exercise they get, their mental health. And if you look at all those categories, that continues to grow. Health and wellness continues to grow, and the investment in yourself continues to grow. And then we spend 10, 12 hours in our laptops and our monitors, an hour or two watching TV, a couple hours on our phones every time in between. I'm always shocked when Apple tells me that I've been on my phone for 4 hours a day.
I hate that alert.
It's crazy, but we all know, we're shake our heads yeah, that's not great. That's not super healthy. Well, how do we improve that relationship? Which we're spending the majority of our time, per day doing. And that's really what gets us excited. Obviously, that starts with our core blue light product, but we just launched a supplement that's aimed at both short-term eye comfort. It has a few really powerful antioxidants to improve blood flow to the eye, but then also has some really important minerals that help with long-term eye health in the retina, which again is clinically backed, is research backed, that we lay out all that stuff. We'll be launching a couple other products dedicated towards sleep, towards productivity, towards dry eyes and things like that. And that then, we'll create a fulsome product suite that we then are allowed to tell this larger digital wellness story, which we think is going to continue to grow in terms of, it very much feels like blue light was 5 years ago, where it was on the tip of everyone's tongue, but it wasn't really being addressed. We think this idea of digital wellness will continue to grow, and we want to be owning that conversation.
I love that. I think it's interesting to go back to your mission of we wanted to solve a problem. Glasses were the conduit to do it the way it was solved, but it could have been solved a million different ways. It could have been something that went in front of all my monitors. It could have been anything. So I love that you're going back to what was the problem we were solving and how can we solve that in multiple ways or in different ways. Geez, you think about even my dad, when he was on a computer for work all day, he only had one monitor and I've got 3 monitors. Plus I look at my phone in between. So it's multiplying.
And they're all LED or a high energy screen, right? Cause in 2008, everything basically got mandated and saying, hey, we have to be high energy now. And so so basically the monitors back in 95 were not creating the same amount of blue light, the same amount of stress in your eyes as they, are today. And so, it's just important that we're, again, we love our technology. It's not saying, hey, technology's bad. It's saying, hey, technology's awesome. It allows me to do work that I love. It allows me to be entertained in ways that I love. But I know that my body wasn't evolved to deal with that all the time. And so how do I have a product suite that helps mitigate those negative effects?
No, I love that. I think, one question for you on that same vein is, a lot of the companies I've spoken with, both in our beta program or on this podcast, are single product companies. You're expanding outside of the single product. Any words of wisdom for go to market strategy? Things that you feel hey, we learned a lot the first time. Here's what we're taking from it, and here's what we're changing totally and leveraging now behind the brand that we've already built.
So I think that as you have customers, you leverage them. So we often will leverage our how did you hear about a survey. We actually saw really good completion rates, and we'd actually ask people different aspects of, for supplements, for instance, we found out that a large portion of our customer base takes a supplement, and a large portion of customer base was concerned about not only the short-term eye comfort that Felix Great provides, and this supplement can help only make it better, but also about long-term potential implications, which we know that there's other ways to help with that, right? With again, these minerals like lutein and zeaxanthin to help with, macular health. And so we kind of pair that up. And so we're making educated guesses, and then we're talking directly to customers as well, right? So at first it's starting with what do you have customer permission to do, which is really important. And then it's just building a product that you feel really proud of, right? And I think that if you don't feel really proud about the new product that you're creating, then why is a customer going to feel really excited about it? So as you're looking to go from that first product to other things, it's really what makes sense to your customer. And then how can we build a product that we're proud of that, that will create success?
Love it. Love that you used the survey for that too, and doing market research passively. I think people were not probably thinking about it when they were filling it out, and then they saw the alert, hey, this product's launching. They're like, oh shit, that's why they asked. which is awesome. And I think that's
Basically,
it's a great way to, you got to build the
exactly.
data to take the action. I think that's really powerful.
And it's a great way of building that first step, right? Like if you go to 50 people, that's only like we collected, I don't know, it was a few thousand data points, right? So you're actually getting like, you can work like as you're building the product, getting those that focused information is really helpful. But when you're first starting out and like, where do you want to go? It's really helpful to work with like some big data sets to be able to have more faith behind one direction versus another. It's when you're really like then honed in on something and trying to improve that. That's when I think it's really helpful to have that one-on-one feedback.
Love it. David, thank you so much for joining me today. Everyone check out felixgray.com. And if they wanted to reach out or connect with you, how can they best go about doing that?
Yeah. So, LinkedIn is, if you, Google David Roger Felix Gray, you'll come up on my LinkedIn, which is always good. And then just, follow Felix Gray on Instagram or on Twitter. That's the best way.
Yeah. Their Twitter is great too. They repost a lot of, funny videos, but also a lot of, just random client content or customer content that's being put out there, which is awesome to see as well. David, thank you so much for joining us today.